When day turns to night, and the moon is hidden from sight, shed the king of you and wear the queen. The 9 realms will open and your magic be free. Hi, my bling. It's your favorite drag witch, Nova Jupiter Jenkins. I'm back on the new moon. It's been a while. With all the attempts to stop me from coming here and attacks, it feels nice to be here in the calming darkness, especially after last time when things weren't so calm. If you're just joining us, you might want to go back and listen to previous episodes to get caught up on the sitch with this witch. If you did listen to the last episode, you're probably wondering what happened. When we last left our intrepid heroine, I was preparing for the arrival of some guests, our rarely seen, not-so-friendly friends, the Blood Wolves. Well, obviously, since the last episode made it out into the world, I survived. If I had died, I might have been able to continue here as a ghost, but there would be no Adam to return to the mundane realm to prepare and upload the episode. But oh my goodness, those wolves were a handful. I was almost in real danger there for a bit. What's that, Gerald?
You were in real danger until I saved you.
Well, you definitely helped, but you were also kind of the trap that helped them to zero in on me in the first place.
That was hardly my fault.
No, it wasn't your fault, and I appreciate the distraction you and Ligeia provided. It possibly made the difference between my surviving and my joining you as a ghost.
Definitely made the difference.
Well, I probably still would have been okay, it just would have been a bit slice and dice here. So as I was saying, because Gerald and Ligeia had basically been turned into a beacon for the Blood Wolves, when we heard the pack enter the library, the 2 ghosts flew off in opposite directions, and at first the pack split to follow each of them. I don't even know how many of those things there were. And where was Peggy, the library entrance guardian, you might ask? Well, with the city pretty much on lockdown, she took the night off to fly back home for a quick visit. So we had half the pack heading upstairs to the astronomy section, and the other half headed downstairs to the geology section, when their bloodlust made them realize that they were getting further away from their intended meal. Fortunately, that was all the time I needed to summon forth the Norkata Shuadak, a blade of silver forged in the fires of the sun, and the only thing that can kill blood wolves. It's not normally an easy thing to whip up, but I volunteered as an organizer for this lunar goddess retreat a while back and made a friends with a few of the deities. You know, sometimes it just pays to network. After that, the blood wolves and I had a little dance, and some of the library denizens were treated to a light repast after the chaos was over. Oh my gosh, I just realized. We can almost kind of hear you on the recording, Gerald. That's amazing. I wonder if it was this whole ordeal or what. But once we narrow it down, you can help me with the podcast more.
Fantastic. Can you read me a story now?
No, I can't read you a story now. I'm still in the middle of the podcast. But you can listen when I read the second half of the ghost story from last time, Ligeia.
Oh, goody.
But before we get back to Ligeia, I have a few more topics to discuss. Firstly, the name of the new moon that follows the wolf moon, blood or otherwise, is called the Carcass moon. I don't think we need to dig too much into symbolism on that. I almost became a carcass, and that's all I'm going to say on that. Even though the blood wolves came straight here from wherever they were sent, the city still looked like it had been hit by a thunder wave. I don't know if it was the same individual or individuals who sent the blood wolves, but someone took advantage of the empty streets to cause a little extra chaos. The cleanup took forever. They barely got it done in time for the festival of Imbolc, which happened a few days before the new moon. I, of course, had to return Adam to the mundane realm, so I missed out, but it looked like everyone partied a little extra hard at not being turned into a carcass themselves. Imbolc is something of a fire festival that celebrates the midway point of the dark half of the year, between Halloween, or Samhain, and May Day, or Beltane. It's a time to bless the seeds that will be used for the planting in the spring, as well as the lambs who have just been born or who are about to be born. I'm sorry to have missed it, especially since the festival honors the Celtic goddess Brigid, who's one of those annoying deities that is sincerely sweet and kind and not just pretending to be sweet so no one finds out what a bitch they are. You know who you are. Alright, so normally I would do some divination at this point, but I haven't quite settled on a new moon divination technique that I'm sold on. So I'll hopefully have something lined up for next time. Well, maybe I'll try a few and see what works best. Okay, let's dive back into Ligeia. When we last left our lovers, the otherworldly Ligeia lay on her deathbed, crying to God and quoting Joseph Glanville, "Man doth not yield himself to the angels, nor unto death utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will." She died, and I, crushed into the very dust with sorrow, could no longer endure the lonely desolation of my dwelling in the dim and decaying city by the Rhine. I had no lack of what the world calls wealth. Ligeia had brought me far more, very far more than ordinarily falls to the lot of mortals. After a few months, therefore, of weary and aimless wandering, I purchased and put in some repair an abbey, which I shall not name, in one of the wildest and least frequented portions of fair England. The gloomy and dreary grandeur of the building, the almost savage aspect of the domain, the many melancholy and time-honoured memories connected with both, had much in unison with the feelings of utter abandonment which had driven me into that remote and unsocial region of the country. Yet although the external abbey, with its verdant decay hanging about it, suffered but little alteration, I gave way with childlike perversity, and perchance with a faint hope of alleviating my sorrows, to a display of more than regal magnificence within. For such follies, even in childhood, I had imbibed a taste, and now they came back to me as if in the dotage of grief. Alas, I feel how much even of incipient madness might have been discovered in the gorgeous and fantastic draperies, in the solemn carvings of Egypt, in the wild cornices and furniture, in the bedlam patterns of the carpets of tufted gold. I had become a bounden slave in the trammels of opium, and my labours and my orders had taken a colouring from my dreams. But these absurdities I must not pause to detail. Let me speak only of that one chamber, ever accursed, whither, in a moment of mental alienation, I led from the altar as my bride, as the successor of the unforgotten Ligeia, the fair-haired and blue-eyed Lady Rowena Trevanion of Tremaine. There is no individual portion of the architecture and decoration of that bridal chamber which is not visibly before me. Where were the souls of the haughty family of the bride when, through a thirst of gold, they permitted to pass the threshold of an apartment so bedecked, a maiden and a daughter so beloved? I have said that I minutely remember the details of the chamber, yet I am sadly forgetful on topics of deep moment, and here there was no system, no keeping, in the fantastic display to take hold upon the memory. The room lay in a high turret of the castellated abbey, was pentagonal in shape and of capacious size. Occupying the whole southern face of the pentagonal was the sole window, an immense sheet of unbroken glass from Venice, a single pane, and tinted of a leaden hue, so that the rays of either the sun or moon passing through it fell with a ghastly lustre on the objects within. Over the upper portion of this huge window extended the trellis-work of an aged vine, which clambered up the massy walls of the turret. The ceiling, of gloomy-looking oak, was excessively lofty, vaulted and elaborately fretted, with the wildest and most grotesque specimens of a semi-Gothic, semi-Druidical device. From out the most central recess of this melancholy vaulting depended, by a single chain of gold with long links, a huge censer of the same metal, Saracenic in pattern, and with many perforations so contrived that there writhed in and out of them, as if endued with a serpent vitality, a continual succession of particoloured fires. Some few ottomans and golden candelabra of Eastern figure were in various stations about, and there was the couch too, the bridal couch of an Indian model, and low and sculptured of solid ebony with a pall-like canopy above. In each of the angles of the chamber stood on end a gigantic sarcophagus of black granite, from the tombs of the kings over against Luxor, with their aged lids full of immemorial sculpture. But in the draping of the apartment lay, alas, the chief fantasy of all. The lofty walls, gigantic in height, even unproportionably so, were hung from summit to foot in vast folds with a heavy and massive-looking tapestry of a material which was found alike as a carpet on the floor, as a covering for the ottomans and the ebony bed, as a canopy for the bed, and as the gorgeous volutes of the curtains which partially shaded the window. The material was the richest cloth of gold. It was spotted all over at irregular intervals with arabesque figures about a foot in diameter, and wrought upon the cloth in patterns of the most jetty black. But these figures partook of the true character of the arabesque only when regarded from a single point of view. By a contrivance now common, and indeed traceable to a very remote period of antiquity, they were made changeable in aspect. To one entering the room they bore the appearance of simple monstrosities, but upon a farther advance this appearance gradually departed, and step by step, as the visitor moved his station in the chamber, he saw himself surrounded by an endless succession of the ghastly forms which belong to the superstition of the Norman, or arise in the guilty slumbers of the monk. The phantasmagoric effect was vastly heightened by the artificial introduction of a strong, continual current of wind behind the draperies, giving a hideous and uneasy animation to the whole. In halls such as these, in a bridal chamber such as this, I passed, with the Lady Tremaine, the unhallowed hours of the first month of our marriage. Passed them with but little disquietude. That my wife dreaded the fierce moodiness of my temper, that she shunned me and loved me but little, I could not help perceiving, but it gave me rather pleasure than otherwise. I loathed her with a hatred belonging more to demon than to man. My memory flew back, oh, with what intensity of regret, to Ligeia, the beloved, the august, the beautiful, the entombed. I revelled in recollections of her purity, of her wisdom, of her lofty, her ethereal nature, of her passionate, her idolatrous love. Now then did my spirit fully and freely burn with more than all the fires of her own. In the excitement of my opium dreams, for I was habitually fettered in the shackles of the drug, I would call aloud upon her name during the silence of the night, or among the sheltered recesses of the glens by day, as if, through the wild eagerness, the solemn passion, the consuming ardour of my longing for the departed, I could restore her to the pathways she had abandoned. Could it be forever? Upon the earth. About the commencement of the second month of the marriage, the Lady Rowena was attacked with sudden illness, from which her recovery was slow. The fever which consumed her rendered her nights uneasy, and in her perturbed state of half-slumber she spoke of sounds and of motions in and about the chamber of the turret, which I concluded had no origin save in the distemper of her fancy, or perhaps in the phantasmagoric influences of the chamber itself. She became at length convalescent, finally well. Yet but a second more violent disorder again threw her upon a bed of suffering, and from this attack her frame, at all times feeble, never altogether recovered. Her illnesses were, after this epoch, of alarming character, and of more alarming recurrence, defying alike the knowledge and the great exertions of her physicians. With the increase of the chronic disease, which had thus apparently taken too sure hold upon her constitution to be eradicated by human means, I could not fail to observe a similar increase in the nervous irritation of her temperament, and in her excitability by trivial causes of fear. She spoke again, and now more frequently and pertinaciously, of the sounds, of the slight sounds, and of the unusual motions among the tapestries to which she had formerly alluded. One night, near the closing in of September, She pressed this distressing subject with more than usual emphasis upon my attention. She had just awakened from an unquiet slumber, and I had been watching, with feelings half of anxiety, half of vague terror, the workings of her emaciated countenance. I sat by the side of her ebony bed, upon one of the ottomans of India. She partly arose and spoke in an earnest, low whisper, of sounds which she then heard, but which I could not hear, of motions which she then saw, but which I could not perceive. The wind was rushing hurriedly behind the tapestries, and I wished to show her what, let me confess it, I could not all believe, that those almost inarticulate breathings, and those very gentle variations of the figures upon the wall, were but the natural effects of that customary rushing of the wind. But a deadly pallor overspreading her face had proven to me that my exertions to reassure her would be fruitless. She appeared to be fainting, and no attendants were within call. I remembered where was deposited a decanter of light wine which had been ordered by her physicians, and hastened across the chamber to procure it. But as I stepped beneath the light of the censer, two circumstances of a startling nature attracted my attention. I had felt that some palpable, although invisible object had passed lightly by my person, and I saw that there lay upon the golden carpet, in the very middle of the rich lustre thrown from the censer, a shadow, a faint, indefinite shadow of angelic aspect, such as might be fancied for the shadow of a shade. But I was wild with the excitement of an immoderate dose of opium, and heeded these things but little, nor spoke of them to Rowena. Having found the wine, I recrossed the chamber and poured out a gobletful, which I held to the lips of the fainting lady. She had now partially recovered, however, and took the vessel herself, while I sank upon an ottoman near me, with my eyes fastened upon her person. It was then that I became distinctly aware of a gentle footfall upon the carpet, and near the couch, and in a second thereafter, as Rowena was in the act of raising the wine to her lips, I saw, or may have dreamed that I saw, fall within the goblet, as if from some invisible spring in this atmosphere of the room, 3 or 4 large drops of a brilliant and ruby-coloured fluid. If this I saw, not so Rowena. She swallowed the wine unhesitatingly, and I forbore to speak to her of a circumstance which must, after all, I considered, have been but the suggestion of a vivid imagination, rendered morbidly active by the terror of the lady, by the opium, and by the hour. Yet I cannot conceal it from my own perception that immediately subsequent to the fall of the ruby drops, a rapid change for the worse took place in the disorder of my wife, so that on the 3rd subsequent night the hands of her menials prepared her for the tomb, and on the 4th I sat alone with her shrouded body in that fantastic chamber which had received her as my bride. Wild visions, opium engendered, flitted shadow-like before me. I gazed with unquiet eye upon the sarcophagi in the angles of the room, upon the varying figures of the drapery, and upon the writhing of the pot-coloured fires in the censer overhead. My eyes then fell, as I called to mind the circumstances of a former night, to the spot beneath the glare of the censer where I had seen the faint traces of the shadow. It was there, however, no longer, and breathing with greater freedom, I turned my glances to the pallid and rigid figure upon the bed. Then rushed upon me 1,000 memories of Ligeia, and then came back upon my heart, with the turbulent violence of a flood, the whole of that unutterable woe which I had regarded her thus enshrouded. The night waned, and still with a bosom full of bitter thoughts of the one, only and supremely beloved, I remained gazing upon the body of Rowena. It might have been midnight, or perhaps earlier or later, for I had taken no note of time, when a sob, low, gentle, but very distinct, startled me from my reverie. I felt that it came from the bed of ebony, the bed of death. I listened in an agony of superstitious terror, but there was no repetition of the sound. I strained my vision to detect any motion in the corpse, but there was not the slightest perceptible. Yet I could not have been deceived. I had heard the noise, however faint, and my soul was awakened within me. I resolutely and perseveringly kept my attention riveted upon the body. Many minutes elapsed before any circumstance occurred tending to throw light upon the mystery. At length it became evident that a very feeble and barely noticeable tinge of colour had flushed up within the cheeks, and along the sunken small veins of the eyelids. Through a species of unutterable horror and awe, for which the language of mortality has no sufficiently energetic expression, I felt my heart cease to beat, my limbs grow rigid where I sat. Yet a sense of duty finally operated to restore my self-possession. I could no longer doubt that we had been precipitate in our preparations, that Rowena still lived. It was necessary that some immediate exertion be made. Yet the turret was altogether apart from the portion of the abbey tenanted by the servants. There were none within call. I had no means of summoning them to my aid without leaving the room for many minutes, and this I could not venture to do. I therefore struggled alone in my endeavours to call back the spirit still hovering. In a short period it was certain, however, that a relapse had taken place. The colour disappeared from both eyelid and cheek, leaving a wanness even more than that of marble. The lips became doubly shriveled and pinched up in the ghastly expression of death. A repulsive clamminess and coldness overspread rapidly the surface of the body, and all the usual rigorous stiffness immediately supervened. I fell back with a shudder upon the couch from which I had been so startlingly aroused, and again gave myself up to passionate waking visions of Ligeia. An hour thus elapsed when, could it be possible, I was a second time aware of some vague sound issuing from the region of the bed. I listened in extremity of horror. The sound came again. It was a sigh. Rushing to the corpse, I distinctly saw, a tremor upon the lips. In a minute afterward they relaxed, disclosing a bright line of the pearly teeth. Amazement now struggled in my bosom with the profound awe which had hitherto reigned there alone. I felt that my vision grew dim, that my reason wandered, and it was only by a violent effort that I at length succeeded in nerving myself to the task which duty thus once more had pointed out. There was now a partial glow upon the forehead and upon the cheek and throat. A perceptible warmth pervaded the whole frame. There was even a slight pulsation at the heart. The lady lived, and with redoubled ardour I betook myself to the task of restoration. I chafed and bathed the temples and the hands, and used every exertion which experience and no little medical reading could suggest. But in vain. Suddenly the colour fled, the pulsation ceased, the lips resumed the expression of the dead, and in an instant afterward the whole body took upon itself the icy chilliness, the livid hue, the intense rigidity, the sunken outline, and all the loathsome peculiarities of that which has been for many days a tenant of the tomb. And again I sunk into visions of Ligeia, and again, what marvel that I shudder while I write, again there reached my ears a low sob from the region of the ebony bed. But why shall I minutely detail the unspeakable horrors of that night? Why shall I pause to relate how, time after time, until near the period of the grey dawn, this hideous drama of revivification was repeated, how each terrific relapse was only into a sterner and apparently more irredeemable death, how each agony wore the aspect of a struggle with some invisible foe, and how each struggle was succeeded by I know not what of wild change in the personal appearance of the corpse. Let me hurry to a conclusion. The greater part of the fearful night had worn away, and she who had been dead once again stirred, and now more vigorously than hitherto, although arousing from a disillusion more appalling in its utter hopelessness than any. I had long ceased to struggle or to move, and remained sitting rigidly upon the ottoman, a helpless prey to a whirl of violent emotions, of which extreme awe was perhaps the least terrible, the least consuming. The corpse, I repeat, stirred, and now more vigorously than before. The hues of life flashed up with unwonted energy into the countenance. The limbs relaxed, and, save that the eyelids were yet pressed heavily together, and that the bandages and draperies of the grave still imparted their charnel character to the figure, I might have dreamed that Rowena had indeed shaken off utterly the fetters of death. But if this idea was not, even then, altogether adopted, I could at least doubt no longer when, arising from the bed, tottering with feeble steps, with closed eyes, and with the manner of one bewildered in a dream, the thing that was enshrouded advanced boldly and palpably into the middle of the apartment. I trembled not, I stirred not, for a crowd of unutterable fancies connected with the air, the stature, the demeanour of the figure, rushing hurriedly through my brain, had paralyzed, had chilled me into stone. I stirred not, but gazed upon the apparition. There was a mad disorder in my thoughts, a tumult unappeasable. Could it indeed be the living Rowena who had confronted me? Could it indeed be Rowena at all? The fair-haired, the blue-eyed Rowena Trevanion of Tremaine? Why should I doubt it? The bandage lay heavily about the mouth, but then might it not be the mouth of the breathing lady of Tremaine? And the cheeks, there were the roses as in her noon of life. Yes, these might indeed be the fair cheeks of the living lady of Tremaine. And the chin with its dimples, as in health, might it not be hers? But had she then grown taller since her malady? What inexpressible madness seized me with that thought? One bound, and I had reached her feet. Shrinking from my touch, she let fall from her head, unloosened the ghastly cerements which had confined it, and there streamed forth into the rushing atmosphere of the chamber huge masses of long and dishevelled hair. It was blacker than the raven wings of midnight, and now slowly opened the eyes of the figure which stood before me. "Here then at last!" I shrieked aloud. Can I never be mistaken? These are the full and the black and the wild eyes of my lost love, of the lady Ligeia. That's going to do it for our Carcass Moon. Don't forget to share us with a friend, comment, let me know if you enjoyed the story, the longer read. Subscribe on Stitcher, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And remember, it may be better to light a candle than to curse the darkness, but you can also just enjoy the darkness.